The last person to leave was a guy in a red hoodie who forgot his water bottle, turned around twice before locating it under the bench where he'd been stretching, and then waved at nobody on his way out. The hydraulic door hissed shut behind him with the specific sound of a seal completing. And then the gym settled into the particular quiet that large spaces find when the crowd drains out, not silence exactly. Because the ventilation system was still running its low industrial hum, and one of the treadmills in the back row had a belt that squeaked every 4 seconds with the reliability of a very small, very consistent clock, but quiet in the way that made each sound distinct, gave each footstep its own small echo, and made it immediately apparent that there were only 2 people left in a room built for 50. Mara Chen counted the rep in her head. 15. She let the cable return with a controlled release, not dropping it, not letting the stack crash the way some people did when they were tired or showing off, just guiding it back with the same intention she'd used to pull it. She rolled her shoulders, shook out her left hand, and looked at herself in the mirror the way she always did between sets, not for vanity. Just to check the neutral spine, the elbow alignment, the small compensations her body tried to make when it thought she wasn't paying attention. Her body was always trying to compensate for something. She'd learned a long time ago to catch it early. The plan for this evening was simple: finish this last cable set, do her cool-down stretches, drink the rest of her water, and go home to the leftover pasta sitting in the container on the second shelf of her refrigerator, which she had been thinking about with increasing specificity since approximately 6 o'clock. She had been training since 6:45. It was now 7:22. The pasta was a fixed point of motivation in an otherwise demanding evening, and she intended to honor the commitment. The plan did not account for the man reflected in the mirror. He was still there. He had been there when she arrived, already mid-session in the far corner where the mirrors were older and the lighting was slightly worse. The kind of corner that serious lifters gravitated toward because it was away from the main floor traffic and nobody came over to ask if you were done with a machine. He had a chalk bag clipped to his belt loop, which was either a sign of genuine grip work or performance. And within about 4 minutes of watching him work, she'd concluded it was the former. He knew what he was doing. He trained like someone for whom training was not a production. His name was Jesse. She knew this because his training partner, a loud, enthusiastic presence named Danny who laughed at everything including his own form, Breaks had said it once across the room approximately 6 weeks ago when she was pretending to read the muscle diagram poster near the squat rack. "Jesse, come spot me. I'm going for my working set." She had filed it away with the same careful casualness with which she had filed everything else that he came Tuesdays and Thursdays. That he always had a coffee cup from the cafe next door before he started. That he preferred single-leg work over bilateral and pulled conventional rather than sumo. And that in 4 months of occupying the same gym at the same hours he had never once spoken to her directly. Neither had she spoken to him. This was a mutual and dignified arrangement. She was committed to it. She set up for her next set and looked at her hands on the handle and told herself firmly to think about the pasta. In the mirror, Jesse set down the dumbbell he'd been holding. She heard the soft thud of iron on rubber mat, a contained sound. Unhurried, he wiped his hands on the chalk bag, then on a towel, and then he started walking across the gym floor in a direction that was not the water station, not the stretching area, not the foam roller rack, and not the exit. He was walking toward the cable machine area, toward her general vicinity. Mara did not look directly at him. She kept her eyes on her own form and kept her hands on the cable handle and ran an internal monologue that went approximately people walk around gyms. This is a normal thing that happens in gyms. There are several machines in this area, and he may be heading toward any one of them. There is no reason to assume he is specifically walking toward you. Do not look. Do not make it weird. Neutral spine. Elbows up. He stopped 6 feet away. Close enough to be deliberate, far enough to be deniable. She turned to look at him with the expression she'd spent several years calibrating, the one that communicated, "I have noticed you, and I am not alarmed by your presence, and also, I have not been thinking about anything in particular." It was a good expression. She deployed it at work regularly. It served her well in most situations. He was taller than she'd registered from across the room. That was the first thing. The second thing was that he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately parse, something careful and something hoping, running simultaneously. The way two weather systems look when they're occupying the same sky and haven't yet decided what they're doing. "You doing another set on that?" he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Not in a performed way. Just in the way of someone who wasn't projecting. Who was just talking. He nodded at the cable machine. "I was going to," she said. He took a short breath. "You want company?" The ventilation hummed. The treadmill belt squeaked its 4-second squeak. Mara looked at Jesse Caldwell, who was looking back at her, who had walked across an empty gym to ask her a 2-word question that neither of them was entirely certain. It was only about the cable machine. She thought about the leftover pasta. She thought about 4 months of carefully parallel existence. She thought about the fact that he had not opened with a compliment or a question about her program or anything designed to establish himself. Just, "You want company," offered simply, "Take it or leave it." "One more set," she said. She heard the words come out of her mouth and noted, from a slight distance, that she was not entirely sure they were only about the workout. "Fine." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, it was more contained than a smile. More deliberate. Like the controlled release of a tension he had been maintaining for longer than this conversation. He pulled a bench over from the adjacent station without asking if that was all right, just moving it to a useful angle, and sat down with his forearms on his knees. "Good," he said. She turned back to the cable machine. Her first rep was slightly off. She adjusted on the second. He did not comment on either. He just watched in the way she had already noticed he watched things, present without being intrusive. Paying attention without requiring that you perform for the attention. She finished the set clean. 12 through 15 were the best 4 reps she'd done all evening. She wasn't going to think about why. She let the cable return and turned to face him properly. And for a moment they were just 2 people in an empty gym on a Thursday night with the ventilation running overhead and the minor surreal quality of a space that had been designed for crowds now containing only them. "You always train this late on Thursdays?" he asked. "Most weeks," she said, reaching for her water. "It's easier after 7. The floor clears out." She drank. "You. Usually done by 6:30. He said it without embellishment, no excuse attached. No explanation for the deviation. Just the statement sitting there openly between them with its clear implication. She looked at him over the rim of her water bottle. He looked back. She said, which was not a response. Which was a placeholder for several things she was deciding whether to say. "Your turn," she said instead, and nodded at the cable machine. He stood and reset the weight. He didn't ask what she'd been using, he'd been watching. She realized. He already knew, and ran through his set with the efficiency of someone for whom this pattern was ingrained. She sat on the bench he'd vacated, which was still warm, and watched him work through the set, and thought with a specific kind of mild frustration about how it was genuinely inconvenient to be attracted to someone who was also, apparently, competent. He finished, stepped back, and they were standing next to each other again in the ambient hum of the nearly empty gym. "Mara," she said. He blinked. A half-second pause. "I know," he said, and then immediately registered the problem with that, and added, "Danny mentioned it. Once." "Danny mentions a lot of things," she said. "He does." Jesse agreed. With the exhaustion of someone who had been subject to Danny's mentions for an extended period. "Jesse," she said. "I know you know," he said. "I do," she confirmed. They were both looking at slightly different spots on the floor, both trying not to smile, both smiling anyway, in the way people do when they are too self-aware to smile openly, but also not quite capable of preventing it entirely. The treadmill squeaked. The ventilation ran. Mara thought, "This is the most I have spoken to this man in 4 months, and I am already in some amount of trouble." "Another set?" he asked. "Obviously," she said, and turned back to the cable machine. Danny arrived 20 minutes later in the way of people who have, in theory, terrible timing but in practice demonstrate a very specific and suspicious precision. He pushed through the door with his gym bag over one shoulder and his phone in his other hand, took 3 steps inside, and stopped. He looked at Mara at the cable station. He looked at Jesse at the adjacent lat pull-down. He looked at the 2 water bottles sitting on the same bench. He did a very brief and very thorough calculation and arrived at a conclusion with the speed of someone who had been running this particular equation in his head for several weeks. "Oh," he said, "just that." A single syllable carrying the weight of a man who has predicted something and is now watching it be confirmed. "You're late," Jesse said, not looking up from the weight selector. "I texted you I was running behind," Danny said, moving toward the free weight rack with the careful energy of someone approaching a situation he does not want to disturb. He looked at Mara again. His expression had settled into something that could only be described as deeply, personally satisfied. "Hi, I'm Danny." "I know," Mara said. "You have a very loud laugh." "People say that." He picked up a dumbbell, did a single curl, set it back down. He looked between the two of them with the unabashed interest of someone who had given up performing disinterest approximately 30 seconds ago. "You two are good. You seem good. You look like you've been talking." "We've been working out," Jesse said. "Together, though," Danny said. "Which is, yeah." He put the dumbbell down. He appeared to reach a decision with the speed of a man whose mind was already made up. "You know what? I just remembered I have a thing." "You don't have a thing," Jesse said. "I might have a thing." "What thing?" "A thing. A prior thing. That I just remembered." Danny was already picking up his bag from where he'd dropped it, which told the complete story of his intentions. He pointed at both of them with the relaxed confidence of a man exiting a situation on his own terms. "You two are good. This is great. Jesse, text me. Mara, nice to finally actually meet you." He waved, turned, and walked toward the door with the stride of someone who had accomplished something. Through the glass panel, Mara watched him walking away across the parking lot with the posture of a man who was going to have an excellent anecdote. She turned to look at Jesse. He was looking at the door with his jaw doing something complicated. "He planned that," she said. "The showing up just to leave immediately. The whole thing." Jesse was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to say probably," he said carefully. "How long has he been trying to get you to talk to me?" Jesse looked at her with the expression of someone doing a very brief cost-benefit analysis. "About 6 weeks," he said, and then added, "give or take," as though the qualifier helped. She felt something move through her that she redirected into a raised eyebrow. 6 weeks. "He noticed I was noticing," Jesse said, "and he has opinions about inaction. And before he started having opinions, you were just going to keep watching me in the mirror." "I wasn't." He stopped. He breathed. "Occasionally," he said. "Occasionally," she repeated, with great gravity. "It's a mirrored gym," he said. "There's a lot of reflected imagery." That is technically true and completely insufficient as an explanation. He looked at her, and she looked back, and she watched him make the decision she had already sensed him making from the moment he sat down on the bench next to her station, the decision to not retreat. To lean into the awkwardness rather than try to dismantle it. To be a person who could be caught doing an embarrassing thing and survive it with his sense of humor intact. It was, she would think later, the specific moment she started actually liking him and not just carrying around the low-level awareness that she might like him if given the opportunity. "Classic and effective," he said, with a perfectly straight face, referring to his mirror-watching strategy. And she laughed. The real one, startled out of her. And she saw it land on him, saw his expression, do the thing of a person receiving something they had wanted without being certain they would get it. She picked up her water bottle. "Come on," she said. "We have time for 2 more sets if we move." They moved. She won the next several rounds of banter by any fair assessment, which was partly a function of her being faster on the uptake and partly a function of the way Jesse fought with patience rather than speed. With the calm of someone who didn't need to score points, who seemed more interested in where the conversation went than in determining its direction. This was, she recognized, a highly specific and effective technique, because it meant she was always the one generating momentum while he was the one steering. And she only noticed this about halfway through her 3rd set of face pulls when she realized she had been talking more in the last 40 minutes than she typically talked in a full workday. "You're doing that on purpose," she said. Between reps, doing what he was on the adjacent cable stack, running tricep pushdowns, not looking at her, being calm. "It's a strategy." "It's not a strategy. I'm just listening." "You're listening in a way that makes me keep talking." "Those aren't the same thing," he said. "They functionally produce the same outcome," she said. "Which means they are, for our purposes, the same thing." He finished his set and turned to look at her with an expression that was not quite a smile but occupied the same space. "For what it's worth," he said, "I find you genuinely alarming." She paused mid-rep. "Alarming. In a good way," he said. "Just that. No cushioning around it. No laughing it off immediately after." He let it sit. She turned back to the machine and ran her final 3 reps and noted that her form on all 3 was slightly less precise than she would have liked because some part of her processing was occupied elsewhere. They moved through the rest of the session in the easy friction of 2 people testing the weight limits of a thing without quite stepping onto it. He offered to spot her on a set of single-arm rows, not intrusively. Just, "You want a spot on that?" And when she said sure, he positioned himself the way a person does when they actually know what they're doing as a spotter. Present without hovering. Close enough to catch a problem. Far enough to stay out of her way. She was 3 reps in when the weight shifted unexpectedly, not dramatically. Just a rotation she hadn't accounted for on the last pull, and his hand came forward fast. 1 palm below her elbow. Steadying without taking over. She recaptured her position, finished the rep. His hand stayed a half-beat longer than the situation required, warm through the fabric of her shirt. Very still, and then withdrew cleanly. Neither of them said anything. She ran the remaining reps. He counted them quietly in the way she hadn't asked him to, and he hadn't announced he was doing. And when she set the weight down, she reached for her towel, and he reached for his water, and they did not touch, but the gap between their hands was small enough that she clocked it. The way she had been clocking all the small measurements of the evening. "Good set," he said. "Thanks for the spot." "Any time," he said. She looked at him when he said it, which she had been mostly managing not to do at close range. And the word hung in the space between them with a weight it hadn't necessarily intended to carry. He seemed aware of it too. Neither of them picked it up. She went to her next station, and he went to his, and she was halfway through setting up when it arrived, the thing she had been not thinking about since the first set. He had known the machine she was using. Not because she'd told him. Not because he'd asked. He'd reset her weight without checking. Had known the stack position from observation alone. And she tried to count backward to a moment when she might have mentioned it or demonstrated it to him and came up empty. He had known before tonight. She thought about this for the rest of the session with the specific, focused quality of someone who has identified a variable that changes the entire equation and is not yet sure what to do with the new answer. She thought about her own coffee cup log. His preference for the far corner, the way she'd absorbed his training schedule without trying to, or at least without admitting she was trying to. She thought, oh, and then she picked up her next weight and finished her set. Because there was nothing to do with oh except carry it and wait to see where it led. She finished her cool-down stretches alone. He was still running his own, and by the time they ended up near the foam roller rack at the same moment, The gym had gone fully quiet except for the ventilation and the ghost squeak of the treadmill belt. And the room had the comfortable, slightly uncanny quality of a place that had stopped performing its function and was just being a place. "Good session," he said, rolling out a shoulder. "Yeah," she said. She looked at him. "You know which machine I use." He stilled fractionally. "You knew before tonight," she said. "You reset the weight without asking." The foam roller in his hands turned once. He looked at her with an expression that was carefully not giving anything away. But the fact that he was being careful about it was itself information. "You're observant," he said. "So are you," she said. "That's the thing." He didn't answer immediately. She didn't push. They were standing in an empty gym, and the evening was narrowing, and the thing that had been sitting unaddressed between them since he'd walked across the room had acquired a specific shape. And she was no longer certain whether to name it or wait for the right moment. Or whether this was the right moment, and she was just hesitating in the way she always hesitated when something actually mattered to her. The lights in the far section clicked to low power mode, the building beginning its polite shutdown. "Thursday's your consistent day," he said finally. "I noticed." "You noticed?" she said. "Yeah." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. The thing between them did not resolve itself, which was fine. Some things needed more room than the end of a gym session to fully open. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She picked up her bag. He picked up his. They walked toward the exit together without discussing whether they were walking together, which was its own kind of answer. The water dispenser in the corner had a small laminated sign taped just below the spout out of order, printed in a font suggesting the person who made it had been mildly but genuinely fed up, and Mara discovered this at the precise moment. Her water bottle ran empty, and she walked over to refill it. She stood in front of the sign. She looked at the dispenser. She looked at the sign again. The dispenser did not change its position on the matter. She turned around and Jesse was crossing toward her with his own water bottle extended, which startled her less than it should have, because on some level she had already registered his movement before consciously noting it, which was itself a piece of information she filed away under the growing category of things she was noticing about how she responded to his presence in a room. "I have a spare electrolyte packet in my bag if you want it," he said. "You carry spare electrolyte packets," she said. "I carry a lot of things," he said. This was the simple truth of him, and she was beginning to understand. He was a person who anticipated needs and brought things for them, not as a performance of preparedness, just because it was practical and the thought had occurred to him. She took the bottle and drank, and handed it back, and he drank from the same side without making a point of it. And the small, easy normalcy of the exchange caught her off guard in the way that small, easy, normal things sometimes do. The lights in the far end of the gym clicked over to their low-power evening mode, the cardio section going amber and dim, making the space feel smaller, more drawn in. The remaining overhead lights in their section were still at full strength, but the boundary had moved closer. It had the effect of making the room feel like a room rather than a facility, more human in scale. They ended up on the floor, which happened the way things happen in empty gyms at the tail end of a session without specific planning, just the mutual recognition that they were done with the equipment and not yet ready to leave. And the floor was there. They sat with their backs against the mirrored wall and the water bottle between them and the ambient hum of the ventilation running overhead. Mara had not sat on a gym floor and talked to someone in a long time. She was aware this was happening and not inclined to stop it. "You come late because it's empty," he said. Not a question, more like reading something he had observed and was checking. "Partly," she said. "It's also just my schedule. But the empty part helps." "The empty part helps," she confirmed. She looked at the ceiling. The tiles had the particular texture of spaces built for function rather than comfort. "I lose count when there are crowds. Not dramatically, I don't lose the whole workout. Just small things. Reps. Timing. Where I'm at in a sequence. My attention gets diluted. You think better with space, he said. I think better with space, she agreed. He was quiet for a moment, not filling it, not rushing toward the next thing. She had noticed this about him across the evening, the willingness to let a silence complete itself rather than treating it as a gap to be covered. She had met very few people with this quality. I trained at a bigger commercial gym before this place, he said. For about a year, peak hours, every machine occupied, someone always needing the one you were using. He turned the water bottle slowly in his hands. The music was loud all the time. Not bad music, just constant. No off switch. He paused. I used to come home and feel more tired than when I left. And it took me a long time to figure out it wasn't from the training. It was from the noise, she said. It was from the managing, he said. Navigating the space. Being ready to be looked at and interacted with the whole time. He glanced at her. I was going to say noise. But managing is more accurate. She looked at him. Yeah, she said. Exactly. This was the kind of thing that, when it happened, had the quality of a key fitting, not dramatic. Not surprising, exactly. Just the specific satisfaction of something aligning with something else that had been waiting for it. She had not talked about this with many people. She was selective. Always. About the true things she handed out, and to whom. Not because she was private exactly, but because she had learned from experience that most people did not know what to do with true things. And she got tired of watching them fumble. He did not seem like someone who fumbled. I took a break from training 2 years ago, she said. She heard herself say it and recognized the absence of the usual calculation that preceded it, the weighing of whether this person warranted this information. The quick read of whether they'd use it well or badly. She had just said it. About 6 months. Just stopped coming. Couldn't make myself. He was listening. Not performing listening. Not the kind of listening that is actually just waiting for you to stop so they can respond, actually listening. With his body angled toward her and his eyes on her and his attention behind his eyes, and not somewhere constructing its own reply. I was going through a hard stretch, she said. Not a crisis. Not anything specific that could be fixed or pointed to. Just everything felt heavier than it was supposed to. And the gym felt like a place I had to demonstrate being okay. And I wasn't okay enough to sustain the demonstration. She turned the water bottle in her hands. So I stopped. What made you come back? He asked. Boredom. Mostly, she said. And my arms were getting weaker. I could feel it in things I did every day, picking things up, carrying groceries. And that bothered me more than everything else did. Which told me something. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was in the neighborhood of one. She looked at him sideways. Not laughing at you, he said immediately. I know, she said. You were laughing at the specificity of it. I was, he said, because it makes complete sense. That the arms thing was the thing. It was the thing, she said. It felt like something I could actually address. And I needed something I could actually address, so I addressed it. She shrugged. Turned out everything else was addressable too. It just needed to wait until I found the handle. He looked at her for a moment. How are your arms now? He said, with a gravity that was clearly performance and clearly also real. Significantly better, she said. Good, he said. She looked at the middle distance. At the amber glow of the dimmed far section, at the foam roller rack and the unused cardio equipment, and the particular emptiness that a gym achieves when it is between its purpose and rest. She had said more true things tonight than she usually said in a month of workouts. She was not sure how she felt about that except that she did not feel bad about it. Can I ask you something? She said. Yeah, he said. What were you going to say earlier? When the lights went to the shutdown sequence, he was quiet for a moment. She watched him decide. Something I wasn't ready to say out loud yet, he said, but was about 2 sentences from saying, and now? He looked at her. His expression had the quality of a window just before someone opens it, everything behind it still contained, but the frame shifting, still working up to it, he said. She nodded. She didn't push. She had spent 4 months not pushing, and she was starting to understand that the restraint had been partly wisdom and partly cowardice, and she wasn't yet certain which part applied here. The ventilation clicked through a cycle. Somewhere overhead, a second section of lights dropped to low power. 20 minutes till close, he said. We should probably stretch, she said. Probably, he said. Neither of them moved for another minute. When they finally stood, she offered her hand to help him up without thinking about it. Reflex. The way you do for someone you're comfortable with, and he took it without making it anything. And they went back to the stretching mats. And the thing he had not yet said continued to sit between them with the patient weight of something that knew it would be said eventually. She thought about it on the drive home. She thought about it while eating the pasta, which was good, and which she barely tasted. She found out on a Tuesday, which was not her day. Her Monday session had been derailed by a work call, the kind that announces itself as 30 minutes and unfolds into 3 hours. Inexorable in the way of all meetings that have no clear owner and too many opinions. By the time it ended, she was too flat to do anything useful with a gym session. So she rescheduled. Tuesday evening, 6:47. She pushed through the front door of the gym and came within 2 feet of walking directly into Jesse, who was on his way out. He had his bag on one shoulder, coffee cup in the other hand. Same logo. End of day. Empty. He stopped when he saw her with the focused stillness of someone processing a variable they hadn't accounted for. Hey, he said. Hey, she said. Tuesday, he said. I rescheduled, she said. Monday got away from me. He nodded. And then, because they were standing in the lobby entry and it was a tight space and there was a perfectly natural and easy way for this to resolve itself, which was that he said something pleasant and went to his car and she went through the turnstile, and that was that instead. Both of them stepped sideways to create passing room and stepped in the same direction, which was the wrong direction, and ended up in each other's path. She laughed. He said sorry. They recalibrated. The natural moment for goodbye reassembled. He shifted his bag. She had her entry card in her hand. You knew I train Thursdays, she said. She heard herself say it and recognized that it had come out before the decision to say it, which was its own kind of data about where she was on the subject. He went still. You knew before last Thursday, she said. The cable machine. You reset the weight without asking. You already knew what I'd been using. The lobby had 3 other people in it, someone at the front desk, someone heading toward the locker rooms, someone sorting through their bag near the door, and none of them were paying attention to this conversation. But Mara was aware of the geometry of it, of standing in a semi-public space, having what was becoming a specific kind of conversation. Jesse looked at her with the expression of a man who has been discovered and is now deciding whether to deflect or be straight with someone, and who is clearly going to be straight with them because deflecting would be worse, and also because he is not especially good at deflecting, which she had noticed about him from early in the evening. Yeah, he said. How long have you known my schedule? He took a breath. A while, he said. Your Thursdays are consistent. It wasn't hard to notice. And last Thursday, she said, staying late, was not entirely unrelated to knowing your schedule, he said. He held eye contact when he said it, which she was aware of. He was not doing the thing where you make a confession while looking at your shoes or the middle distance. He was looking directly at her. I noticed you came late on Thursdays. I stayed late on Thursday. I'm not going to pretend those weren't connected. She stood in the lobby with her entry card in her hand and let this land. The anger organized itself first, the way it always did when she felt she'd been navigated, the quick, bright flash of, I was managed. I was a coordinate in someone's plan. She knew this reflex. She had it with a precision and reliability that had cost her things over the years. The speed of the defensive response closing off situations before they had fully revealed what they were. She knew it, and she did not know how to be slower with it. But she tried now. In the lobby of a gym, with a man holding an empty coffee cup. To wait. Below the reflex, the memory of realizing he knew her machine. The moment she had filed away and not examined. And below that, her own log. The coffee cup logo. The preferred corner. The training schedule she had absorbed without trying. Or without admitting she was trying. Which was not the same as not trying. She had been running the same operation in the opposite direction for 4 months. She had just been less honest with herself about calling it an operation. You could have just talked to me, she said, without the arrangement. I know, he said. I was going to. I was bad at picking the moment. And you thought manufacturing the moment was better. I didn't manufacture it, he said. I stayed. I didn't engineer a crisis or get Danny to arrange anything or, he paused. Okay. Danny showed up and then immediately left. But that was Danny. I stayed because I wanted to talk to you and I didn't have a clean way to just walk up and do it. And I thought if we were both there with enough time, it would happen naturally. That's the definition of manufacturing it. That's the definition of creating conditions. He said, there's a difference. Tell me the difference. I didn't pretend anything was different than it was. He said, I asked if you wanted company. You said yes or you would have said no. Everything after that was real. She looked at him for a moment. He was right that everything after that had been real. She'd been there for all of it. She knew what real felt like and what performed felt like. And the evening had been real. Start to finish. Including the parts that were awkward and the parts where he'd said things before the filter caught them and the part on the floor by the mirrored wall where she'd told him about the 6 months off without doing her usual calculation first. You were watching me for 4 months, she said. You know I was, he said. The same way you knew which coffee shop I order from before I get here, and which corner I train in, and that I pull conventional. He said it without accusation, just evenness. I'm not the only one who was paying attention. This was the sentence that made the anger difficult to maintain at altitude. Not because it let him off the hook, it didn't. And both of them knew it, but because it was true in the specific way that true things are true. Clearly and without decoration. And she could not stand in a lobby and reject it when she had spent 4 months filing away details about a man she had not spoken to because she was not ready to speak to him yet. They had been doing the same thing. He had just been slightly more deliberate about Thursday. You're buying me coffee, she said. After my session, to finish explaining yourself. He absorbed this. His face did the thing, the controlled release. The same as Thursday. Quiet and real. Okay, he said. I have a full session first. It'll be an hour at least. I'll wait, he said, and moved toward the lobby chairs by the window. She went through the turnstile. She did not look back. But she was aware of him settling into the chair, the soft sound of his bag hitting the floor. The slight creak of the seat, and she walked toward the locker room with the entry card still in her hand, and the echo of, I'll wait still in the air behind her. She had 1 hour. She spent the first 20 minutes lifting with the focused intensity of someone who is using physical effort to process something too large for stillness. Her form was excellent. It was always excellent when she was working something out, because the precision of it required a specific kind of attention that crowded out the circling thoughts without eliminating them. He just held them at a useful distance. By the third exercise, she was thinking more clearly. By the fifth, she had arrived at the thing she had been circling. He had stayed late because he wanted to talk to her and didn't know how to just do it. She had come late on Thursdays for 4 months and never once walked across the room to say a single word. To a man she had been noticing since the deficit deadlift session in the 3rd week of her membership. The mechanism was different. The function was the same. She thought about the water bottle extended across the space, the spare electrolyte packet, the counting her reps quietly, the way he had said you asked if I wanted company, not if you could join me when she'd pushed back on the Thursday arrangement. She thought about I'll wait. She was on her last set when she acknowledged the thing fully. In the clean, specific way of admitting something you've been carrying, She had been angry because being noticed felt like losing control of the narrative. And she cared enormously about the narrative. And the real question was not whether he had done something wrong, but whether the thing he had done was what she was telling herself it was. He had stayed late because he wanted to talk to her. He had asked if she wanted company. He had not lied about anything, not even when it would have been easier to let the information stay buried. She racked her last weight. She picked up her bag. She walked out to the lobby. He was still in the chair by the window, phone face down on his knee, looking at the street outside where the pedestrian signal was cycling through its sequence for an empty intersection. Not performing waiting, just waiting. She stopped for a moment and looked at him, and the lobby was quiet. And she knew what she was going to say at the coffee place. And she was no longer angry. And the thing she felt instead was something warmer and more complicated and entirely her own problem. She walked toward him. He turned his head when she was 6 feet away. "Good session," he asked. "I worked some things out," she said. He stood, picked up his bag. He did not ask what things, which was the right call. "Coffee place closes in 40 minutes," he said. "Let's go," she said. The coffee place was narrow and warm. The kind of narrow that meant the two people at the counter were technically in the same space as the two people at the back table, which was where Mara and Jesse went automatically, both of them moving toward the corner without discussing it, the way people with the same instincts do when they are no longer pretending not to have them. The barista acknowledged Jesse with the nod of a person who recognized a regular, and he ordered a black coffee, and Mara ordered a cortado. And they sat down across from each other in the particular light of a cafe that was winding down, warm and slightly gold and very still, and Mara put her bag on the floor and her hands on the table and looked at him. "Okay," she said. "Full version." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. It was a habit she had already catalogued, the slow rotation, the way he used his hands when he was organizing his thoughts. "First time I noticed you was probably 3 weeks into your membership," he said. "You were setting up for deficit deadlifts on a platform someone had left assembled wrong, and you fixed it yourself before you started. Just saw the problem, corrected it, got to work." He looked at the table. "I thought she knows what she's doing." "That's the whole origin story," she said. "That's where it started," he said. "After that it just accumulated. The machine order you run. Your playlist, I can't hear it, but I can tell by how your head moves when a song changes. That you only chalk your hands for heavy pulls, not lighter accessory work." He glanced up. "You roll your left shoulder before a hard set. Always twice." Mara was quiet. "The coffee cup gave me away," she said. He blinked. "Your logo," she said. "I recognized it from seeing it enough times. I knew you ordered before sessions, not after. I knew you preferred the far corner because the lighting's worse and people don't wander over. I knew your training split." She held his gaze. "I knew your name because I was standing close enough to hear Danny say it. And I was standing close enough because I had been drifting in that direction for reasons I was not fully acknowledging." She let that settle. "So, I want you to understand that your Thursday plan was completely visible to someone running the same operation in reverse." The cafe was quiet around them. The other two customers were at the counter, not listening. The espresso machine ticked through its idle cooling cycle. Jesse was looking at her with an expression that was working through several stages in a short time, the first being recognition. The second being something that looked like the specific relief of a person who has been carrying a thing alone and just been told they don't have to. "So we were both," he said slowly. "Yes," she said. "For 4 months, give or take, watching each other very carefully, and saying nothing," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Then, that's the most elaborate way two people have ever just not talked. We were being deliberate," she said. "We were being avoidant. Those aren't mutually exclusive," she said. And he laughed, the real one, not the controlled version, the one that broke through the patience, and she felt it as something in her sternum, warm and specific, and thought, There it is. That's the thing I've been making complicated for 4 months. He drank his coffee. She drank her cortado. Outside the window, the street was doing the things streets did at this hour, a few cars, a couple walking past. The amber of the pedestrian signal. Why didn't you just talk to me? She said, not accusing, genuinely asking. He thought about it. By the time I had a reason to, it had been long enough that it felt like it had weight. He said, walking up and saying hi at week 2 is nothing. Walking up and saying hi at month 3 means something, and I didn't know if you wanted it to mean something or if you'd rather I hadn't. So you waited until you could manufacture a situation where it could happen naturally. I waited until there was a window, he said. There's a difference. You said that before. It's still true. She looked at him. The window could have existed any Thursday for 3 months. She said, you were there. I was there. The window was open. The window was open. He agreed. I was bad at going through it. So was I. She said. Which was the true thing. The one she had arrived at during her session. The one she had gone to the gym to find and come away with. I knew your schedule and I never used it. I noticed everything and I said nothing. I had the same window. He looked at her across the small table. What changed tonight? He said. The Tuesday you rescheduled to. What made you say something in the lobby? She thought about it. You had an easy out. She said. The lobby. The coincidence of it. You could have said hi and goodbye and made it nothing. You didn't try to make it nothing. You told me the truth. Even when the truth was inconvenient. She turned the cortado cup. I don't have a lot of patience for people who manage situations, but I have a lot of patience for people who are honest about managing situations. Even when the managing was not my best moment, he said. Even then, she said, because the honesty after is what actually matters. He was quiet. He was looking at her with an expression she had been cataloging all evening and now understood. It was the face of a man who had wanted a specific thing for long enough that getting it was still something he was adjusting to. I've been thinking about asking you to coffee since approximately week 6 of your membership, he said. Week 6, she said. The same week Danny started having opinions. Danny has very reliable instincts for these things. Apparently, he's insufferable about it. Jesse said. He's been saying, I told you so by text for the last hour. She laughed. He watched her laugh with the specific expression she had first catalogued on Thursday and now recognized for what it was. The expression of a man who had wanted this particular laugh for a while and was still slightly surprised to be the one producing it. You should have talked to me at week 6, she said. I know, he said. I was working on it. For 14 weeks, she said. It's a process. It's a very long process. You have a very particular energy, he said, with a gravity that she recognized as the particular humor he used when he was saying something true that also happened to be funny. It's clarifying, but also a little alarming, and I needed to make sure I was prepared. Were you prepared? I was significantly more prepared than my Thursday execution suggested, he said. She smiled. Not the careful one. Not the calibrated one. The one she gave freely. He saw it. His face did a small, quiet thing. The shoulder thing, she said. The roll before a heavy set. You noticed that? First month, he said. That's very specific. It's a compensatory pattern, he said. It told me your left side is your limiting factor on overhead work. I noticed because I was watching your form, and I was watching your form because you were watching me, she said. Because I was watching you, he confirmed, without apology. She thought about the 4 months, the mirror reflections, the coffee cup logo, the machine she preferred, which he had known, he knew, which had been the first crack in the careful architecture of her not saying anything. It's a very efficient gym, she said. For people who don't talk to each other, very efficient, he agreed. We both got a lot done. We also both wasted 4 months of Thursdays. I wouldn't say wasted, he said. She looked at him. No. I learned your training split, he said. Your shoulder pattern. The fact that you fix equipment that other people leave wrong without waiting for staff to do it. That you come late because crowds dilute you and you think better with space. And that your left arm got weak 2 years ago, and that was the thing that reached you when nothing else did. He looked at her steadily. That's not nothing. She held his gaze. You absorbed all of that from across the room. You gave it willingly, he said. You just didn't know who you were giving it to. This was the sentence. She recognized it as the sentence the way you recognize the specific note a structure makes when it shifts under you, not alarming. Just the sound of a thing settling into a new position. She had spent 4 months being very careful about what she handed out and to whom, and apparently she had been handing things to Jesse Caldwell across a mirrored gym room for the duration without realizing the transaction was happening. She was, she thought, not remotely as guarded as she had believed. She finished her cortado. He finished his coffee. The barista made the quiet sounds of a person beginning to close down the space, and Mara looked at the window in the street outside and thought about Thursdays. Outside. The air was cool, and the parking lot lights were doing their amber work over the empty spaces. The gym next door was lit up with its always-on neon, signifying to no one in particular that fitness was available. And they stood on the sidewalk in the specific moment that exists after a conversation has arrived somewhere and before people go in separate directions, which is its own kind of location. Same time Thursday, he said. Same time Thursday, she confirmed. He looked at her. She looked at him. The sidewalk was empty in both directions, and the night air smelled like the cooling end of a day. And Mara thought about the 4 months of parallel existence, and the careful not noticing, and the coffee cup logo, and the machine she preferred, and the fact that both of them had been running the same operation without calling it that, and thought enough. You should text me, she said. Before Thursday, if you want to. He held very still for a half-second. Danny has your number, he said. He's had it for about 3 weeks. She closed her eyes briefly. Of course he does. He said he was holding it for the right deployment window. Jesse said. His words. I'm going to have a very specific conversation with Danny. He'll take full credit for everything. Jesse said. He deserves about 50% of it. 40, she said. We were getting there. Were we? She looked at him. I fixed my entry route the 3rd week, she said. So I'd pass the free weight area instead of going directly to the cable station. His expression did the thing it did when he received information he was still absorbing. That adds about 90 seconds to the route, he said. 90 seconds of passing the corner where you train, she said. Yes. For 4 months, he said. 4 months, she confirmed. He breathed in slowly through his nose. He looked at the parking lot. He looked back at her. We're both, he said, very bad at this. We're deliberate, she said. Not bad. The outcome was the same for a long time, he said. The outcome changed, she said. We're here. She picked up her bag. The parking lot was still, the gym lights doing their orange work. The night settling around them with the specific quality of a Thursday in October that was going to be remembered because of what happened in it rather than what the weather was like. And she thought about Thursdays ahead of this one, which were now a different kind of thing than they had been in the morning. Jesse, she said. He waited. The staying late was a good plan, she said. Even if it took you 6 weeks and Danny's interference and a manufactured window. She looked at him. The water bottle and the electrolyte packet and the counting my reps quietly and the I'll wait in the lobby chair. All of it was a good plan. He said nothing for a moment. The kind of nothing that was not absence but presence. Everything behind it. You made it easy, he said finally. She turned and walked toward her car, and she heard him walk in the other direction. Unhurried. At the pace of a man who had reached a reasonable end to a long and good evening. She did not look back. She did not need to. She had already done the looking. In 4 months of mirrors and careful not noticing. And the accumulated weight of all that quiet attention had landed somewhere. And she knew now what it was. And she drove home thinking about Thursdays in the way that people think about things that have changed from a neutral fact into something they are looking forward to. The pasta was still in the refrigerator when she got home. She ate it at the counter, standing up, not tasting it. Thinking about a man who carried spare electrolyte packets and knew which shoulder she compensated with, and had sat in a lobby chair for an hour without needing it to be less than that. She thought I should have said hi at week 2. She also thought it would not have been the same thing. Some things needed 4 months of accumulation before they were ready to be said. She had done the work. He had done the work. The shoulder roll, the machine preference, the coffee cup logo, the 90 extra seconds she had added to her entry route. None of it wasted. All of it leading to the specific shape of Thursday, which was 3 days away, and which was now, definitively, something she was looking forward to. She washed her plate. She put it in the drying rack. She picked up her phone and looked at it for a moment. And then she put it back down. Because he would text her when he had Danny's dramatic deployment of her number. And she could wait. She was, it turned out, good at waiting when she knew what she was waiting for.